If Tiberius Gracchus was the spark that shook Rome, his younger brother, Gaius, was the firestorm that followed. When Tiberius sought reform in moderation, a single law to redistribute land, Gaius pushed far beyond, challenging not just the Senate, but the very structure of the Roman Republic. He was young, brilliant, ruthless, and ambitious. He understood the art of politics, the power of the people, and the threat of the army. And he would wield every one of them to reshape Rome. This is the story of Gaius Gracchus, tribune of the plebs, champion of the common people, and the man whose reforms would bring the Republic to the edge of chaos. When Tiberius Gracchus was murdered in 133 BCE, Rome's foundation shuddered. The Senate had sent a message: challenge the elite at your peril. Yet the poor and dispossessed, the very people Tiberius had championed, were not silent. They had a taste of hope, and they wanted more. The land commission Tiberius had begun continued in fits and starts, but without enforcement, much of the reform stalled. Inequality remained extreme. Rome's urban poor crowded the streets. Soldiers returned to empty farms, and resentment simmered. Amidst the turbulence, Gaius Gracchus began to emerge. Gaius inherited the family's extraordinary lineage. Like Tiberius, he was the son of Cornelia Africana, daughter of the famed Scipio Africanus. He grew up in a household of learning, moral discipline, and devotion to the Republic. But Gaius was different. Where Tiberius had been cautious, Gaius was bold. Where Tiberius had been introspective, Gaius was energetic, strategic, and politically savvy. Cornelia nurtured both sons, installing in them a sense of duty, but Gaius carried it with a sharper edge, bending compassion for people with a willingness to bend the rules to achieve results. By the late 130s BCE, Gaius had begun his political career. He served in minor magistrates, learning the rhythm of Roman civil life. Unlike many nobles, he cultivated a deep connection with the common people. He listened to complaints in the forum, understood the struggles of the soldiers and laborers, and learned how to frame arguments in ways that would resonate with the masses. This was not just empathy, it was strategy. He understood that popularity among the people could counterbalance the Senate's power. In 123 BCE, Gaius ran for tribune of the plebs, following the precedent his brother had set. He won decisively, riding a wave of popular support. From the start, he sought to push the Republic further than Tiberius had dared. His first acts were bold. He expanded the land reform initiated by his brother, enforcing limits on estates and accelerating redistribution to Rome's poor. But he did more than Tiberius. He introduced measures that directly challenged senatorial dominance. Gaius's reforms were ambitious and comprehensive. Grain law. He established a subsidized grain program, ensuring that every citizen could buy grain at a fixed, low price. This was revolutionary, creating a permanent safety net for the poor. Colonization. Gaius established colonies in Italy and abroad to provide land and opportunity for those dispossessed. Judicial reform. He transferred the courts of certain crimes from senators to juries of equestrians, diminishing the Senate's legal monopoly. Citizen expansion. He proposed granting Roman citizenship to Italian allies, a bold step towards inclusivity that enraged traditionalists. Infrastructure projects, roads, aqueducts, and public works employed the urban poor, stimulating the economy while building loyalty. Through these measures, Gaius became a hero to the people. Yet every act that empowered the citizens also diminished the Senate's authority. Gaius was skilled in coalition building. He worked with younger senators, sympathetic to reform. And he drew in equestrians, Rome's emerging business class, who saw advantages in reducing the Senate's legal power. At the same time, he courted the people directly. Public speeches, assemblies, and festivals became tools of political engagement. He understood the power of spectacle. A well-timed speech, a visible act of generosity, a public show of commitment could sway crowds and intimidate opponents. But his enemies were formidable. The Optimates, Rome's conservative elite, saw him as a direct threat to centuries of senatorial control. The same families that had orchestrated Tiberius's death now plotted against Gaius, determined not to repeat their earlier mistake. The reforms that strengthened the people also escalated the conflict. Senators began using obstruction, bribery, and threats to block Gaius's initiatives. Political pamphlets and speeches accused him of seeking kingship, undermining the republic, of corrupting the citizenry. Unlike Tiberius, Gaius was prepared. He used legal innovations, the assemblies, and the alliances with the equestrians to counteract the Senate. He was relentless. Yet, the underlying dynamic remained the same. One man commanding the popular support, pitted against the entrenched autocracy. Gaius sought and won re-election for a second consecutive term, an unprecedented move that alarmed the Senate. During this term, he pursued more ambitious reforms. He moved to implement citizenship expansion for Italian allies, further expanding grain subsidies and strengthening land redistribution. He also began preparing for colonization projects outside of Italy, aiming to reduce urban crowding and secure loyalty in newly settled regions. Each of these measures provoked fierce opposition. The Optimates denounced him from the Senate's podium. Senators harassed supporters, attempting to block commissions, and fomented unrest in the city. By 21-1 BCE, Rome was on the edge of open conflict. Supporters of Gaius crowded the forum, ready to defend him. Senators and their clients spread rumors of treachery. Public assemblies became a site of tension, intimidation, and minor skirmishes. The Senate finally issued the Senatus Communis Ultimum, the final decree of the Senate. It was a declaration that allowed magistrates to use any means necessary to protect the state. In other words, it legalized violence against Gaius and his supporters. Gaius was trapped between his political ambition and the reality of a Senate willing to kill. In 21-1 BCE, the confrontation reached its tragic climax. Senators and their armed followers marched into the forum. Clashes erupted in the streets. Gaius and his supporters attempted to resist, but the Senate's forces were brutal. Gaius fled to Aventine Hill, a symbolic site of protest and refuge. There, he and his allies were surrounded. Fighting broke out, and Gaius was struck down, reportedly killed with clubs, staves, and stones. The precise details lost to history. Thousands of his supporters were also killed. Bodies were thrown into the Tiber or dragged through the streets. The Republic had entered a new phase. Political violence was no longer a threat only to reformers. It was a tool to enforce power itself. The death of Gaius Gracchus left the city in shock. The Senate claimed victory, but the people were outraged. The reforms of Gaius were mostly rolled back. Though the grain laws survived in modified form, many of his supporters fled or were silenced. Yet the memory of his actions lingered. Gaius had shown that popular power could challenge the Senate, that law could be bent to serve the people, and that the Republic's traditional mechanisms were fragile. Together, Tiberius and Gaius Gracchus represented a turning point in Roman history. Idealisms clashed with entrenched privileges. Reformers challenged the power of elites at great personal risk. Violence became an acceptable part of political life. The Republic's slow collapse did not begin with Caesar Augustus. It began with two brothers fighting for justice in a world unready for it. Their story is both tragic and instructive. Reform is difficult, and the rules of politics are fragile. Though separated by more than 2 millennia, the story of Gaius Gracchus echoes today. Inequality fuels unrest. Economic disparities can destabilize societies if left unchecked. Populism can challenge entrenched power. Charismatic leaders can mobilize the people to push reform. Norms matter. When political traditions are ignored or broken, institutions weakened. Violence begets violence. Once political actors use force to achieve goals, peaceful politics becomes harder to restore. The Gracchus brothers remind us that republics are delicate. Ambition, inequality, and the misuse of power can unravel even the most sophisticated systems of governance.